Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome to the second event of Work Differently. Tonight we have Joshua Poole, who has created his own company that is called Simply Creative. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about him. So he's a photographer and graphic designer. He moved to Montreal from Victoria, BC, with the dream of creating his own business to help others create and share their stories. He was raised in a business-minded family, and having never gone to business school, he has learned what it takes to be a successful business owner, purely by doing. And I remember when we talked to prepare the event, you said that entrepreneurship is very much part of your DNA. You have opened your first business with your mom and sister right after design school.
Yeah.
And
though it wasn't my first company that I ever tried
okay,
starting.
you'll tell us more about that.
Sure.
Your two grandfathers on both sides, your mom's and dad's sides, were also successful entrepreneurs, and you got very much inspired by your dad, who was able to create his own success. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and where it all started?
Well, for me, I knew from an early age. I can remember. I mean, my dad owned a business and created it from scratch, and he owned an electronics retail business back when high-end electronics was still something of value. I mean, now market prices drop pretty much 50% every 2 years, or even faster than that sometimes. But at the time, technology was still progressing fairly slowly, and this was in the 90s. So as a kid, I grew up in that environment where we had a home theater in our basement, or we always had the latest and greatest technologies, and it was something that I loved. And always being around that business and being able to go to the shop and see what's going on and see the vibe. And my dad, I know now, at the time, I didn't even realize it, but he put on some of the biggest events in the community and basically gave people a way to have a good time. And because I got to see that, something was seeded in me where I was like, you know what, I want to know how I can create this, because I saw how good we could create our own lives. And admittedly, I had no idea how successful we were, because my dad never really talked about money, and he put me to work at an early age. He helped me get my first job at the age of 13. So I was always kind of itching to be like, I want to be in your shoes, not working down here.
Nice. Well, thank you. And then after that, what happened?
Well, because I went through so many jobs from 13 to, I guess, about 20. I mean, over my whole life, I've gone over 20 different jobs, whether it's being fired or quitting myself, getting tired of it, that I decided at the age of 20, you know what, I can do this better than them. And it wasn't because I was being arrogant, but it was because I saw all the flaws that many business owners have. And I felt, you know what, I want to try this out, because I've watched from an early age, being in that environment, that I could see that it could work and it could be really successful. And so I quit my job as a manager at a janitorial business at the time, and I opened my own first company, which was Clearly Clean, which was a janitorial company, and I cleaned different office places in my local town.
And you just took the leap like that? You just decided, let's go for it,
Yeah.
and
I
I would be a business owner?
Yeah, I partnered with one of my friends. He was working for the same company at the time, and I said, you know what, we should do this. We should try and make our own way. And we actually had some pretty good success. Like, we got the local newspapers and a couple of different offices in the area, and we registered the business. But quickly on, or very early on, I realized that we were doing things wrong, because my dad was piping in the back of my ear. It's like, where's your GST number, or other technical bits about business. And I'm like, wait, I did some research. I was like, okay, maybe I should do this a little differently, because if I continue this way, it's going to cost me a lot more money. And so I decided to sell the business to my partner, and ended up doing something else.
Okay. Yeah. Creating another business?
Not at the time. Around then, I would have started getting into construction. Yeah.
So, going back to what you were saying earlier, it sounds like you always wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Oh yeah.
how do you know that you want to be an entrepreneur? Because I very often have people coming to me and saying, I'm tired with my job, I don't want to do anymore what I'm doing, I'm tired to have to be managed by that person that I don't like. But then it doesn't mean that you have to choose entrepreneurship. And very often I have this question, how do you know that you should, take the leap and just jump into it? So how did you know?
I knew because I've worked obviously for over 20 different companies, and every time I'd go into it, I would have something that would frustrate me. And I would try either many times voice it to the management or the higher-ups, or find ways of doing it differently. And in every instance, I would either realize that it was futile and I couldn't share it with the people, or the people that I would share it to would just brush it off. And that just kind of frustrated me more, and I was like, okay, well then I really got to do it on my own. If I can't rely on them to create the solutions for me or help me create the solutions, I had to do it on my own. And I realized that entrepreneurship is a very personal thing. Like, I've learned so much from the different businesses that I've made, especially when you mentioned it earlier, when I created a business with my mom and sister. That's where I learned a lot, and I realized that it's not for everyone. And when you do go into it, you learn a lot about yourself. It's such a personal adventure, and it really is a venture because it's an emotional roller coaster. You have your ups and downs. You have times where you basically have no money, and a couple of times I almost ended up on the street, and I'd always come back from it because
part of the game.
yeah.
So what did you learn about yourself?
How strong I was, and how capable I was at getting myself through different situations, because every time I hit rock bottom, like one time I was living out of my car, I would pick my feet up and I'd be like, okay, time to start a new day, and I'd either get a job and then start up another business, or I would dig into the dirt and try and find a piece of gold, look for that next client or next opportunity.
So what advice would you give to someone who's thinking to become an entrepreneur?
I'd say do it. But
go for it.
It's going to be the hardest thing in your life.
You're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, but it's so worth it. I mean,
How so?
For me as a person, I've changed immensely just because I decided to go down that road. I've learned how to be more humanitarian. I also listen to myself more, whereas in previous jobs, I never did. I pushed myself to the limit. I'm a hard worker. I love working hard and doing something to my fullest. And being an entrepreneur, I realized that I needed to take a step back and slow things down.
What are the qualities according to you to be a successful entrepreneur?
One is first and foremost determination. You can't give up, because I've seen too many friends and other colleagues that are into entrepreneurship where they give up right before their success. And from doing the studying, I love reading and listening about different businesses. And I know that every business that's been successful, they always had a moment where other people in their lives would quit and do something else or go back to a job. And I did that myself. But if you can push beyond that, there's always this opportunity of success. And you never know when it's going to happen. And it happens to pretty much every business.
Well, you seem very fulfilled and exactly where you were supposed to be. And again, when we talked before, you said, for me, it was a liberation not to have to work for someone else.
Yeah.
And that word, liberation, is so strong. What does it mean to you?
For me, it's the freedom to live my life as I want. And not that having a job is bad, but I realized from working, having a job consumes so much of your time and your life, especially when you're working full time. I mean, it's 40 hours at least in some positions. For me, in some of my jobs, it consumes 60 plus hours of my week. And that's my whole life, basically, like my social life, and any other potential to work on any other projects or build something on the side. That's all gone because I'm working a full-time job, and ultimately, my time was more valuable to me. So, sure, you could make $25, $35 an hour, but it just wasn't worth it for me. I saw greater potential.
And what did it take to get there? Do you have maybe one or two little stories that are definitely to be shared to show the path that you had to take to get there?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of difficult jobs, especially after my first business. I mentioned how I went into construction. I spent 7 years doing construction in different businesses. I started off doing about 5 different experimenting, and then I found one actually through my dad. He was investing in a custom staircase in a furniture company, and so he's like, you should apply. So I did, and I got the job. And the company was fairly small. We were maximum, I think, 4 employees, and I was always the boss's son. And people picked on me as a result of that, so it wasn't easy. I had like the crappiest jobs you can imagine, but I still loved it because the things that we created were amazing. Like we'd make $100,000 staircases and $4 million houses. I just loved being able to build something with my hands and seeing the result from you take the raw materials and you create something just completely magical out of it.
So it sounds like you've been trying a lot of different things until you reach the place where you are today.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, part of the game. And today you're doing what you're doing, but it's maybe good for you right now. And maybe in 10 years, again, you'll be doing something different. But you went through that journey to get to know yourself a bit better and reach that place where you are doing exactly what you love.
Totally. And actually, to continue with the construction, is there was a point during that job where it got really difficult. Ultimately, it came down to me and the gentleman that my dad was investing in. And so it was just 2 of us working all the time, building stuff. And he kept me because he saw the potential. I was very detail orientated, so he would do the rough construction and building things, and I'd always refine it and do the final shape. And at the end, we were basically at each other's throat. It was rough because, I mean, we were really close friends, and we developed a relationship through that. And whenever you get into business, I know people say it's not personal, but it is personal.
Yeah. So tell us about what you do today. What's Simply Creative about?
Simply Creative is, so as you mentioned, it's helping people share and create their stories. And I came up with that idea because through business, I've always asked myself, what is it that people really resonate with? And what's that thing to help people grow to the next level? Take their businesses and really connect with their audience. Because that's how a lot of businesses make success. So for me, it came down to stories. I love reading stories of entrepreneurs or people who basically came through difficult times to create immense success. And it gives me the chills every time I think about it.
Can you share like one success stories that you have?
Sure, yeah. So one that I listened to today, actually there's a bunch that inspire me, but this one in particular really resonated with me. I used to be more so when I was younger a skateboarder, and it's really a rebel culture. And so as a young age I had that rebel mentality, but the gentleman in question is the man who started Burton Snowboards. I'm trying to remember his name, but I only have his last name in my head right now. But Burton was actually his middle name, and early on in life he had a lot of difficulties. He lost his brother, his father, and mother at young ages. And he came up with the idea of creating snowboards because his family would go to hills or resorts. And it was called the Snurfer at the time. So this was way before snowboarding was on anyone's radar. And he realized, even at an early age, I think he was about 13 or maybe even younger, it's like there's potential to this to develop. And he had a feeling that businesses would take it and just grow it. I think this was in the 70s even, that he was doing that, and no one did. It just dropped by the wayside, and it always stuck with him. And sure enough, when he was old enough to, he decided to start making them himself, and he experimented with over 100 different designs, and then when he finally set on one, he built a bunch of them, had a factory in I think one of the places he moved to Vermont where it was snowboarding culture, or so he thought, because the ski resorts were there, and he thought he was going to be successful. Like, he did the math early on, and sure enough, when he started trying to sell them, zero interest. No one was interested. He would go to doors, different ski shops. He would do advertising of different sorts. It was silence. And I don't know if you know the story of Burton, but now it's 1 in 3 snowboards is a Burton snowboard. That's how big it is. And snowboarding is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And he's created massive success out of that. And just by being persistent and going through difficult times, like, he hired family and then had to fire them. And then he had to do it all by himself, and then building them. And he just persisted. And it wasn't a massive growth, but it just continued to grow piece by piece. And then it was always steady growth. And now he's created an entire movement.
That very much ties up with what you were saying earlier, that he just went for it.
Yeah.
He tried. It didn't work that well, but because he was so determined, that this time it paid off.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today we are all about working differently. How do you do things that are different from other companies, entrepreneurs?
Well, I like to take a mixed approach. So I mix old school business with some new school mentality. Old school in that right now I've created a team, and I subcontract them. So the idea behind that is it's less overhead for me as a business owner, but it allows me the flexibility to continue to grow and pay them at the same time. So it has a lot of commitment on my end, even though they're subcontractors, because I keep that team mentality. So any project that comes my way, I'm communicating with them. Okay, what's going on, the process. Okay, this is how I'm bidding on it. This is where they stand. This is what they want to create. And just by doing that, they're involved in the creative process. So it's a blend of in-house designers or creatives versus outsourcing. And I came up with this just because, 1, I had a low budget, and 2, I wanted to create something that would inspire others. So, and once I started sharing the idea with others, they jumped on it immediately.
Yeah, that's interesting, because someone else would say, well, I'm just hiring some subcontractors, and
Yeah.
you are talking about, I have created a team.
Yeah.
What does it mean to create a team? What does it look like?
Well, going back to something I mentioned earlier, the personal element of business.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's always been personal, even when people have told me otherwise. And because of that, I love connecting with individuals. And so whenever I went out or got the different individuals or heard about someone, like, I've basically used every means possible to find these people. And it would always come down to the connection that I had with them. So I would start talking to them and tell them my ideas, or even the potential of this, because storytelling in business is still very infant.
Mm-hmm.
It's tiny. You can even look it up online, and Forbes has already written on it, and other big companies, but for whatever reason, people seem to be afraid of sharing their stories.